Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
And today's episode is inspired by numerous posts I have seen in various Facebook groups and emails that I tend to get about whether or not people really need a freelance contract and how on earth do you find one and what should I put in there, et cetera, et cetera. So today I'm only going to focus on one particular aspect of the whole contract debate, which is what happens if you don't have one? So I see a lot of people go into new freelance relationships and they don't realize that they need a contract until it's too late and they have been burned by the person. So if you're getting your jobs on Upwork or Guru, Freelancer, some other platform like that, where there's a third party managing the relationship, holding funds in escrow, etc., you don't really need a contract. But for any private job that you have with someone, including your neighbor, that small business owner you met at a Chamber of Commerce meeting that you're sure wouldn't stiff you, whoever it is, you need a contract with them. And there are more reasons than just your legal protection at stake. The contract serves a lot of purposes in a freelance relationship, not the least of which is defining who's responsible for what. When you're communicating with someone only over email or even using the phone a little bit, the margin for error is huge. So if you don't have a contract, there's always the possibility that you're going to go do a whole bunch of work and then the client is going to come back and say, this isn't what I was looking for, or this isn't what we agreed to. It gets you both on the same page. So yes, you want to have a freelance contract in order to kick off any business relationship that is not on a site like Upwork. So consider that. Keep that in the back of your mind that it does more than just protect you legally. And, in this episode, I'm only talking about, what happens if you don't have it? What could go wrong if you don't have it? That's a biggie because clients tend to underestimate the scope of their project. And if you don't have a contract, let's say you agree to something for $1,000 and then the client keeps requesting phone calls and you spend way more time on this project than you thought and it drags on forever and ever, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be really problematic for you because the client may think that's just included in their $1,000. And if that wasn't your expectation, but it's not clarified in writing, you really have no protection. Another thing that could happen if you don't have a contract is there's no real written record that the job existed. So I've even had clients before when I first got started, I did not realize the importance of contracts. And we would start on a job and they'd just email me and say, hey, I want to hire you. And I'd go, oh, okay, great. The price is this. And then I'd do the work. While sometimes people are fair and will pay you what you agree to verbally, if there's no written record of it and you need to file a legal claim later on and there's no signed contract, at least in the United States, there's very little that could be done to pursue that. I mean, it was just, it depends on the laws of your state and whether or not verbal contracts are accepted and all of that. But you're going to end up probably spending more time on legal and filing fees than it's worth. Whereas a contract in place clarifies that relationship between you and the other person and gives you some course of action if there is a problem. And the lack of a need for a contract is one of the big reasons that I stayed on Upwork as long as I did. And I still do business on Upwork because there's real clarity about what the job is and who's responsible for what on a site like that, where you both have to agree to the terms before you kick off. If you don't have a contract, you really have no record of what you and the client agreed to. It's really easy for them to say that they've been stiffed. You guys never agreed to anything. It was a gentleman's agreement and all of that. It just, it exposes you to so much. So you could have a client easily take advantage of you just because you never agreed in writing. And it's actually dangerous when you know the person because sadly, this is a case where the person might actually try to take advantage of you more because they're counting on your good nature. They don't think you're going to blow up the relationship because you know one another. Maybe you know each other personally, or it's your cousin, or it's a friend of a friend. And they may actually have a higher chance of trying to take advantage of you with no written contract because they doubt that you will take them to court, or that you will push the issue. You'll just, not be paid, or you'll take abuse from them, or be asked to do a whole lot more than you originally agreed to, and you'll just do it out of the goodness of your heart. So if you don't have a contract, it not only causes this tense relationship between you and this person, but it could actually damage a friendship or a relationship with a family member because they thought XYZ and you thought ABC, and you guys were never on the same page and you never signed and agreed to anything. Another thing that can be really problematic if you don't have a contract is, especially in the United States, there's a legal distinction between being an employee and an independent contractor. And you want your contract to stipulate the terms of the working arrangement because you either want to be categorized as an employee or as a contractor. And there are certain protections afforded to you as an employee under the Fair Labor Standards Act and all of that if, you're entitled to overtime or whatever it is. And it's really based on who's responsible for determining the working relationship. There are tests you can do online to figure out whether your relationship is really more employee-based or contractor-based. But as a contractor myself, I don't want to sign agreements that make it seem as though I'm an employee because I have a whole different set of obligations to the person than I want. So for me, I want to be really clear in that contract that I am not an employee and that I am a contractor and that they're not to, do payroll withholding or request that I be on call 8-10 hours a day at a desk. So if you don't have a contract, there can be some legal confusion there in the United States about what rights that person owes you. And it's a liability issue for the employer or the client as well, because if you try to come back after the fact and say that you were misclassified as a contractor when you should have been an employee, that exposes them to potential legal action and having to pay you back overtime and all of this stuff. So you want to be clear at the outset of the relationship what you are in a legal sense as far as contributing to their business. And most freelancers are going to be contractors. Now, there are situations where a client may come to you and say, hey, we can only hire you as an employee. And that's something you need to think through the consequences and whether that's something that you want. I mean, I have taken on employee kind of W-2'd situations in the United States for certain freelance clients, but that's definitely the exception and not the rule. But if you don't have a contract, it creates way too much gray area as far as what's expected of you and what you are under the eyes of the law. So it's good to have that clarified up front. Hey, Better Biz Academy fans, you know I love sharing my favorite tools, tricks, and materials that I use to make my life and my business easier. My favorite recently are the Studio line of Bluetooth headphones. They're amazing. They're not only stylish because of the Scandinavian design, but there's so many different options for you to choose from that it's easy to find something that fits your lifestyle. The Bluetooth headphones from Studio make it easy to run a business as well as, check in and listen to your favorite music on your run. You're going to get 15% off just for checking out the Studio line of headphones by using the discount code BETTERBIZ when you go to purchase anything from their site. So check it out. I've been using the Studio headphones for months now and absolutely love them. I'm sure they're going to be a fit for your life, both aesthetically and as it relates to really good audio quality. Another thing that can happen to you if you don't have a contract, and this relates in particular to anyone who does work that may require edits, writers, even VAs, web developers, web designers, graphic designers, you're going to probably go through an iteration in your work process with a client where they have to review the work and then tell you what changes they make, and then you make the changes. With no contract, you're essentially, in a way, saying unlimited revisions because there's been no clarification otherwise. So with no contract, the client can say, well, I paid you $1,000 for this web design and I'm not going to be happy with you or pay the rest of the invoice until you've made this page function the way I want it to, even though I've now added 50 things to the scope of work and it's well beyond what I would typically pay $1,000 for. You have not clarified that there's a particular process they need to follow. A contract will usually say something like, after the initial draft is complete, the client will review and have a maximum of 14 days to provide feedback. And after 30 days of submitted work with no comment from the client, final payment is due. Something like that, so that you can rein in the client and not have them going on and on forever. Because particularly with websites or books or really big projects that you're working as the freelancer, the client may have unlimited requests. If you don't rein them in and establish some boundaries with what's expected and what they've actually paid for, they'll just keep pushing back. Oh, can you make these changes? Now I want these changes. Can you make the website green? Now I want it purple. Can I see it in pink? And if you haven't agreed that, after each round of changes, they have to certify that this is the last thing they want changed and this is the final version. And, they have a max of 30 days to get email support from you, whatever it is in your contract. If you haven't specified that, there's going to be confusion over it. And then you've got an angry client, because if you write back and say, well, that's going to be $500 more because it's different from what we originally talked about, you and the client already have differing perspectives on what you originally talked about. And the opportunity for conflict there is huge. So the client's going to be unhappy about paying more money. You're unhappy because you're being asked to do way too much outside the original scope. You've got problems on both sides, and it's unlikely that either one of you or both of you is going to walk away happy from that kind of interaction. So having a contract clarifies everything. And it's not always the case that a client wants to take advantage of you. They simply may not know better. This was something I got into a lot when I first started writing. I didn't specify revision requests. And I had one client that would actually put grammar errors into my writing and then send it back to me and ask me to update it reflecting the new inaccurate wording or inappropriate grammar. And I would write back and say, this is not, I don't want my name attached to this. It's not correct, and I didn't have a contract with them. And they would say, well, just change it anyways. That's what we want. And we think it's right. Well, then I'd change it. And then they'd get a complaint on their website from somebody who read it and said, hey, this is grammatically incorrect. And then they would come back to me again 3 or 6 weeks later after this was long over with and paid for and ask me to change it again. Well, I opened myself up to those problems because I didn't have a contract that said how long they had to request changes and how many rounds of changes would be allowed within the contract. So writers, for example, may allow a maximum of 2 rounds of revisions. If the client hasn't put it in their feedback up to that point, it's now their responsibility to fix it if you're after that second round. You've got to decide what's going to work for you, but you don't want to rely on verbal things. And it's really dangerous in any work situation where the people you're working with are changing. So you may have agreed to the terms with the CEO, but you're dealing with the project manager on a day-to-day basis as you're turning in work or doing your freelance contract requirements. And they may have different ideas. They may not know what you and the CEO agreed to. Again, that contract is going to help you. The other thing that can happen if you don't have a contract is that you won't get paid, or you won't get paid on time. Every business that you interact with, from solopreneurs to major companies, is going to have different requirements in terms of their accounting and invoicing. You want to know about that up front so that you can account for that in the contract that you put together. If you don't put clear payment terms in the contract because you don't have a contract at all, then the company is well within reason to wait 90 days to pay you, right? If you didn't say that all invoices needed to be dealt with on a net 30 basis or within 15 days after being received, they're not obligated to do that. You haven't agreed to that. So they may say, well, it's still sitting on somebody's desk, or we'll get to it next month. And in fact, the client I've had the most payment problems with over the last 5 years was one where I didn't have a contract, and it was just in good faith. I was continuing to work for this person, and there would be invoices that were 6 weeks overdue, and big invoices too, $1,000, $1,800. And it was such a waste of my time to have to keep going back into that email and say, hey, this invoice is still pending. This work was turned in almost 2 months ago. Please pay it. And then they'd write back, oh, I was sure that was paid. And, you'd start this whole cycle of, them trying to get out of paying it or saying that it was already dealt with, and you showing screenshots inside your account that it wasn't, and so on and so forth. Creates a big headache. And it was because I didn't have a contract, because I didn't have something I could refer back to. Another reason that a lot of freelancers benefit from having payment terms in their contract is because they will attach a late fee or some other type of penalty if the client doesn't pay within the stipulated terms. So it's not just about saying in the contract, you'll pay within 30 days of the work being submitted. A lot of people will have a $25 late payment charge, a 10% late payment charge if it's the 10th business day and it hasn't been paid, or they'll say all work will cease immediately until the invoice has been dealt with. You hope that you never have to activate these things. When you're a freelancer, you don't want to have this relationship with a client where you have to email them and say, I've added a $25 late fee to your invoice because it hasn't been paid. But you can't just always rely on good faith. Now, there are lots of people out there that you could count on with good faith, but you're taking such a gamble that I do recommend having a contract if you can put one together, if you don't know if you can trust this person, because it helps to just clarify everything. And while you hope that you never have to use those terms, there could come a day when you need to exercise them. And you want to be able to say, here's a copy of our contract that we signed 3 months ago, stipulating that a late payment charge would be added. This is standard procedure. This is my company's business practice. In the future, you can avoid it by paying the invoice on time. You never want to go there, but if you have to, it's good to have something to back you up. And then finally, if you don't have a contract, you're so limited as far as what you can do if there is a problem with the terms of the contract being enforced. If you have a contract and you're both in the United States, you can file in small claims court. You can take other legal action to try to recover the money that you're due, or to cancel the contract, or whatever it is that you need to do that relates to that important document. But if you don't have a contract, you open yourself up to so many problems because there's no closure to the relationship. You could have a client who harasses you and wants you to continue working because they don't accept your resignation, even if you put it in writing. If there's no terms within the contract, or no contract at all that says, hey, the business relationship ceases immediately after written notice is provided, you leave an open loop that the client is unhappy about. And it leads to problems. So it's very hard for you to exit a business relationship, even for the right reasons, if you don't have a contract. That's one reason I really, really, really recommend having a contract to protect you and the client. So there's so much to learn about contracts. And yes, it's worth having a lawyer. And yes, it's worth having a standard contract drafted by an attorney that you can tweak and adjust as necessary with your clients. But I just wanted to cover a couple of the things that typically come up as it relates to what happens if you don't have a contract. Like, what problems are you really exposing yourself to? I'd love to hear the other types of protections and tools you've put in place in your freelance business to minimize problems, and in particular, legal issues.